this is Frank Sohl from Novo CPQ Consulting. I'm the founder of Novo CPQ, and the reason we came up with this webinar was that, especially over the last 3 to 6 months, there were many requests about how to select the solution for your business, and that could be anywhere from a very small business, 10 to 15 users, up to several thousand users. How do you go about that? And while there is not a standard approach that works for everyone, there is a standard process you can follow and adjust to your needs so that you can use it. And instead of doing it on a one-by-one basis, we wanted to automate this a little bit more. That's why we came up with the webinar, and we've also developed functionality on our website that helps someone who's looking for a solution to get some idea, to get important information where they can start. So this is actually the first step. When you're selecting a CPQ solution, you will realize there are many vendors out there, and they all are configure price quote, so CPQ solution providers, but they offer very different functionalities. Therefore, it's important that you follow a process. You adjust the process that I'm showing you now to match your needs. And it makes absolute sense to take some time to evaluate the solutions while they all seem to have the same name, a lot of overlapping capabilities. Not every CPQ solution is the same as the other and may not be the right for your business. So keeping that in mind, when you go for a solution, it's a good upfront investment to spend some time looking at your processes before you actually go ahead and select the solution. Now let's start with a general overview over here. So the first thing is, and it goes from top to bottom over here, is the project authorization. Is a standard project management step that you should keep in mind. Get your project authorized. Make sure that the project sponsor knows what they are looking for, what are the goals. So basic project management steps. Then, and we will talk about each and every one of these steps over here in a little bit more detail in a minute. Then you gather your business requirements. That could also be in form of use cases or user stories. You determine the limitations that you have to live with in your company. You put together a selection committee, the people who actually make the decision about which tool you're going to go with. You determine the evaluation criteria that you want to use to select the tool. You determine different CPQ solution providers that would potentially be able to offer a solution for your case. Then you go through this request for information process. You analyze the response that you get from the different vendors. You slim it down to a maximum of 4 vendors, which you ask to come on site and do a demo of their solution. After the demo, you do a scoring, and after the scoring, you are doing a decision. So that was the high-level overview, top to bottom. Now let's go ahead and start to look at the first step again. I will skip over this fairly quickly. The reason I mention it is I've seen it a couple of times, especially with smaller vendors, that you do not spend a lot of time over here. Maybe a couple of steps are still open. I think you do yourself a favor if you come back with if you have at least a high-level project plan for the CPQ tool selection, to make sure whatever time frame conditions you have to live in, so that you have timelines for it and you can stick to it, and you have an official approval from a sponsor to go about it. So make sure it's approved, everything is set up as it should be before you get started. Now, this step over here requires a little bit more information than what I have on this slide. So while yes, you have to identify and prioritize business requirements, and you have to address the questions, the 5 W's, that's correct. What I see, especially over the last couple of years, I would say, is that companies implemented a CPQ solution at one point. The CPQ solution is no longer working as they were hoping for, because they were skipping a step initially. And this skipping of the step is to look at your current processes. So you need to really find out how is your current process working. And usually in the CPQ world, you would distinguish between 6 different steps here. You create a configuration, that's where you work with the product configurator. You apply the pricing, that's where you work with the pricing capabilities. You handle quote approvals, that's the workflow part. You create the quote, that's the quoting part where you have forms and conditions over there. At one point, you hopefully convert the quote to an order. That's the 5th step. And last but not least, you do reporting and data analysis of your transactions. So you need to analyze what you do today in order to get benefit from a tool tomorrow. So that's the very first step. Review what you currently do. You should be very clear at the end of this what your major pain points are. Then if you have a business requirements document at the end, if you have use case or user stories, that depends on your environment, but you should have one of the 3 which clearly tells you the story, where the pain points are and where you need improvements. You prioritize this once you've gone through this. Afterwards, you determine what are some key technology and business operations considerations that you have to take into account. That could be something, you have certain administrative requirements, right? You want to have single sign-on between systems. You may look for certain adaptability of the user interface, whatever that is. Find this out before you start looking for a CPQ solution provider. Then once you know your existing processes, you know your existing pain points, you have developed the use case that need to be addressed, then it's time to really determine what are you going to do to improve these business processes. So you have to develop improved business processes. When you do that, you will run into risk and possible risk responses. So you need to look for these for your new improved processes so that you know what it is, and you should also understand what the business impact is of your proposed changes. So this is something that is causing companies major issues if they skip this step. This is an important step, very important to ensure that your CPQ implementation becomes successful. So do not skip it. And it takes some time. So keep that in mind before you start selecting a tool. Go through these steps and follow it. Okay, enough about that. I think I got my point across on this one. Now it's time to determine your limitations. So what I mean by that is you're not starting from scratch. It's not that you can implement everything, right? So your company already has systems most likely. So a CRM system, a backend system, an ERP system, CLM system, PLM system, CAD systems, whatever you have over here. There is probably a whole bunch of tools, and your CPQ tool has to potentially integrate with them. And you should always assume that, so keep in mind what you already have, what it needs to integrate, if there are changes to it, and also keep in mind what are the objectives of your executive management team. Maybe they already worked with a specific vendor in the past and made very good, had a very good experience and want to try that again. Or they had a not so good experience and do not want to go there again. Talk to your team, find out what they are, what their limitations are. You should also ask them what's the available budget when you go and select your CPQ tool. Determine also, as I mentioned on the last slide, determine the impact of the changes when you implement the new CPQ solution. Technical requirements, so security settings and so on, any other restrictions that come to mind, and then you have to also look at the expected data flow and use between these systems, because the CPQ system sits right in between your CRM system, customer relationship management system, and your ERP system, your enterprise resource planning system, and so the data will need to go back and forth. And the question is, how is that supposed to flow? How much additional work is it? How can you do that in the best possible way? So determine these limitations as the next step. Then you're at the point you already know what you want to do. you already know what limitations you have. Now it's time to determine who is actually going to make the decision about this tool. And in this case, we recommend that you have, first of all, you have stakeholders from IT and from business. And I know there are different reasons on both sides why that's not always desired. I think in general it is a good and safe assumption to have both teams work together on this, because at one point or the other you will need to work together. So you should behave like a team and include them. When you select members from these two teams, and with business teams I obviously mean something like the sales team, like the marketing team, and so on. And in this case, what you want to make sure is keep the team small. Because you need to reach a decision. The more players you have, the more challenging it will be to make a decision at the end. So whatever is appropriate for you, first of all, we recommend an uneven number. That's 3, 5, or 7. And second, keep in mind, the more members you have in that group, the more challenging it may become to make a decision. But it still needs to be something that's bought into by all the stakeholders. And when you keep in mind what the stakeholders are in general, for a CPQ project, you would have the product management team, you would have the sales team that includes the inside and field sales team, that includes the marketing team, that includes legal, that includes finance and IT. And in this case, so you already have a large number of stakeholders. So from that pool, determine which people are going to make the decision. And you should do that again before you go ahead and talk to any of the vendors. Okay, so now you know what people make the decision. That's great, but you also need to determine how do they make the decision. So you need to provide them some guidelines. What are the tool evaluation criteria? It's a key area, and you would need to say, for example, what's most important for you. You configuring very complex products, for example, you're having drilling equipment for an oil field, and the machine you're working with has several thousand parts. So it's a good chance that the product configurator is most important for you because that's the most complex part. It may be that the configuration is not that complicated because you have not that super complicated product. Let's assume it's a software product, and the pricing piece is for you maybe more important than the product configurator piece. So you have to determine in the beginning, how do you want to evaluate this? And you need to include, again, members from the business and IT community to help you establish these criteria. What's most important to you? What business cases you have to address, and what capability you need for this? So this is very important also to address any potential misalignments afterwards, after you saw the tools and you evaluate them. It is very helpful to establish this up front to make sure where are your priorities, what do you need to address. So do this again before you see demos, before you follow up with vendors. And now the next step is you need to first of all find out who is a potential CPQ provider for you. So what you would do from our point of view here is you need to select 8 to 10 providers. You may have less, but you shouldn't have more than this over here ideally. Because what you want to do is you want to learn a little bit more about them. You want to make sure these are potentially firms who can help you, who can provide a solution to you. And since I saw a lot of companies over the last 3 to 6 months that they were struggling with this, we came up with this approach of providing more the same information, comparable information about all the providers on our website. And let me jump out of this over here for a second and onto our staging site at this point. This is something where you have 2 approaches. So keep in mind, the CPQ Provider Series will help you to determine 8 to 10 vendors, potentially less, to see who is right, who could potentially provide a solution for your business. What you have over here are two general approaches. You either already have some information about the vendors and you want to download this information, then you could go over here and just download the vendors that you have. Or you could go to a questionnaire and get some guidance on what vendor is potentially right for you. Now, before I go there, I want to show you what is in this fact sheet, because we saw that, as I mentioned, a couple of times now. It's always the same information, and instead of doing this haphazardly in one-on-one meetings with one customer for 2 hours, with the other one for 8, we thought it was very helpful to have the same information about the CPQ providers. Have a look at it yourself. Get some information yourself first before you talk to a consultant or a vendor. So in this case, you have some information in here, basic information about the company, the year it was founded, the products, number of customers, and so on. You have top management, average experience of this type, what kind of CPQ it is. You see that we go to software evaluation sites like G2 Proud, Capterra, and Trust Radius. Look up the reviews for you over there from users who used this. So it's one perspective. If this vendor is working with implementation partners, you would see an evaluation from them as well over here. You see that the vendor describes their ideal customer, and you get some information about the vendor, which geography, for example, they do most of their business, where the support team is located, minimum, maximum number of users. Very important questions for many prospects who are just starting to look into this. You want to know what's the special strengths and capability. What are you doing better than anyone else, right? And you have the current customers, and that is always large, medium, small. You want to see who are companies working with, where do they use the tool? Do they use it with their sales team inside field sales? Do they use it in an e-commerce context, so they have it on a website? Or channel partners actually use this over here, and that's what you see here. Then you have different support languages, currencies, industries, and so on. You see the different capabilities that are included. You see these some additional notes from the vendor. The integration that it does is very important. The CRM, ERP, CAD systems, any other third-party systems which are important to mention, and partner of this CPQ provider. Who are they working with? Who are they partnering with? And then we have the CPQ tool maintenance. This is very important to understand what is needed to keep your system updated after the implementation is done, right? So you have new product introduction, you introduce new products to your system, you change existing products, you change prices. So what's needed to keep the system up to date? You have technical resources, you have business-oriented resources. What kind of training will they need to go through to get this? How many people are needed on average? This contains quite some useful information over here. Then you have contact information, so you will get personalized sales information. There will be the name of a person that you can also, it will have a link to LinkedIn to see who that is, what these people do. You will have a link to the company's website, and you have 4 screenshots over here. The first one is for a salesperson. That could be inside or field sales. How does the tool look like for a sales team member? How does the tool look like if I'm using it on an e-commerce website? And third, how does the tool look like when I work for a channel partner team and I access the tool? And if you have a developer interface, then you will also see how that tool looks like for a developer. So this is the information in the spreadsheet. Keep in mind, this is just the beginning. We will work with all the vendors to get as many as possible involved in this program to provide you as the prospect the best possible information. The program starts on September 12th, and so what I was showing you over here is a staging site to test the functionality before we go live. Okay, but let's go back over here, because that was just one aspect of it. So we want to make sure you understand there is the Provider Series. It helps you to get this information in any case, if you use it or don't, you should have 8 to 10 providers at this stage, not more. Otherwise, it really becomes hard to handle. And you should also, if you have the time, if you have the resources, go ahead, look at some of the provider sites which are potentially interesting. You may also want to go ahead and check the software review sites directly. And you also may want to look at data that you have from analysts like Gartner, Aberdeen, Forrester, and so on. So in any case, at the end of the step, you have 8 to 10 providers. What you want to do with them is you want to ask them for some additional information. So you start this request for information process. What you want to do is you want to ask them a number of questions to make sure this provider would be a potential fit for you, and you don't want to ask more than, let's say, at most 50 questions. And this number is a little bit arbitrary. The point over here is if you send this to 10 different providers and they all answer this question, you also have to analyze it. So you really want to make sure what you're asking over here makes sense, provides you valuable information that you absolutely need, and then you go ahead and send it out. And also keep in mind, so if you use the provider series document that I showed you, a lot of these questions have already been answered. So in any case, here's some ideas. If you look for this, you want to contact the firms, you ask for some company information, right? Like the number of customers, you want to know how long the company has been in business and so on. What's the experience in general? You want to see the functional requirements that they address, right? So because you have a specific situation in your business, you want to make sure that the requirements actually address these your business cases. Your business case. Then you have the administrative requirements over here. Users need to access what security you have, what self-help options do you have, right? And so to understand what effort is connected to that. The data maintenance requirements. Yes, you will need to maintain a product model going forward. How much effort is that? Can you do that with existing resource, or do you have to go ahead and hire additional people or people with different skill sets, or retrain people? So you want to know that. You want to see what the pricing is, what different offerings do they have, right? As a lot of companies have standard and enterprise pricing. There may be more options over here. Find it out, determine what you need also for support, the reporting and analytics functions that you require, and then also make sure that you understand what's the warranty, right? So when you have any issues with the system, how much, what's the system availability, and so on. So these are all ideas for a request for information process. Again, keep in mind, do not ask more questions than you have to, and keep it in since you have to analyze them afterwards, and that can be pretty time-consuming process. Last but not least, please make sure to ask the vendors at this stage not to add any marketing material here to it. What you want to do is you want to have your questions answered. And if anyone who is adding marketing materials to it is automatically disqualified at this stage. Okay, so once you send this out to the vendors come back, respond to you with this, you should go ahead and put all these answers in one common file. You can use Excel, you can use Google Sheets, whatever works best for you. I've seen this many times that this helps the most. Otherwise, you're just playing around with too many different files. So if you answer all this information, if you add all this information in one file, that's very helpful. You probably should set up a scoring logic ahead of time where you say, okay, if you ask these questions, what does it mean? So if I meet the criteria, what you're asking for, so you're getting the answer that you're looking for, that means you meet the criteria. If you do that partially, then you get this meets criteria partially, 50% rating. And if it doesn't meet your expectation, then it does not meet the criteria, right? So you have 0%. And again, keeping this weighting in mind that I mentioned earlier, so what is very important to you, and then how important is it that this specific criteria is met? So you establish a weighting, a logic in here that helps you to score a vendor, to have kind of a number at the end, right? What you then want to do after you're done with this and you get this back, and let's assume that you have that you did this, that you get this back from 10 different vendors, then you would go ahead and determine 4 where you think they meet your criteria the best, and you want to learn more about it by following up with them in more detail. Before you do that, you want to make sure that you discuss these results with the selection team committee members, and if possible, other key stakeholders from the business and IT community as well. The important, if you have if you work with a CPQ consultant, a specialized CPQ consultant, then get their feedback too. That's good. The idea is you want to make this decision over here. You want to discuss your scoring with other stakeholders if you have a very close 4th and 5th, so that you're on the same page where you which one you want to invite and which one you don't. Anyway, at the end of the step, you want to reduce your number of potential solution providers down to 4. These are the ones that you want to invite for detailed analysis, and you want to see their solution in your context, right? So now, when this is done, you want the 4 to come in and actually do a demo. When you do the demo, one key expectation is that all the selection committee members must attend these meetings. So they all need to be there. And you should provide your CPQ provider a script that shows them what you are looking for. So that in your case, it's important to make sure all your evaluation criteria are met, so you get an understanding how well does this provider meet your criteria. And the CPQ provider gets a clear understanding of what do they need to show, what's important to you. They would not necessarily see what how you score and rate this afterwards, obviously, but they would understand what do I need to show this customer that we address their requirements. The one key thing to keep in mind from a customer's perspective is here, you need to control this meeting because you need to have your questions answered. It needs to fit your business case afterwards. It has to work in your environment, so you need to control it. If the vendor shows you additional functionality that is potentially beneficial, that's great. But what you definitely have to do is all this effort that you put in to determine business requirements, to develop future process flows, to develop your use cases and so on. So this needs to be addressed in here to make sure whatever you're selecting is really something that gives your company the biggest benefit. So that's the consideration over here. So you're not just inviting someone for a demo, you give them a clear script on what they should do, what they should follow, what you're looking for. Okay, then once you're done with the demo, you need to score it, which also means if you score it, you have to do some preparation ahead of time so that the demo attendees can actually score the demo. So this is something that you should do ahead of the meeting based on your evaluation criteria, where you say, okay, which parts are very important to you? What scripts did you provide the vendor that they should go through to show that they can address your business case? And in this case, you want them to have the attendees an opportunity afterwards to say, okay, this is what I like, this is what I didn't like. In order to prevent a group effect here, is you should have each stakeholder score the demo separately for themselves, directly after the demo. So this is something that cannot happen 2-3 hours after the demo. It should not happen a week after the demo, obviously. It should happen right after the demo, before different attendees talk to each other to prevent this group effect, right? This is something you want to control as a customer for these CPQ solution providers, to make sure if I want to buy this, I want to get the feedback from my people first, and I want to meet with everyone afterwards to also get the group analysis, right? To see, what did you think about this? Where were they strong? Where did they have, where was more to do? Okay, so this is again, let them score for themselves. Then have the group scoring, and then you're at this point you're ready to compare the demos. So all the vendors came in, they all got the script from you, what they should go through. They did the demos. You had the ratings. Now you compare these demos. So you compare the single and the group scorings. And you want to have the selection committee members and other key stakeholders. You want to have them discuss the results again. So now, in this case, what you want to do is you want to really determine your two top CPQ providers. The reason you have two is if something should go wrong for whatever reason with your absolute favorite, you need to have a backup. Maybe something doesn't work out in the first 4 weeks and you're getting concerned that you may not meet your milestones, that you may have other challenges, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that you have a solution that is working and is fulfilling all the requirements as needed. So you notify this the first vendor, tell them that they are the vendor of choice. You start the negotiation, and you will tell at least that's what we recommend, notify that the second vendor, the backup vendor, that there is still a chance that they may come in, but the decision is expected in the next 4 weeks. So in this case, you have two solutions that you could potentially implement. You make the decision for your first choice, obviously, you determine this backup, and then you have a contract and you do some contract negotiations. As I indicated over here, I think it's important to make sure that you have some milestones early in the project to get confirmation that the vendor can deliver as you expect, and you can actually go ahead and move forward. Some notes over here before I stop. This process doesn't have a set time. What I see in general is this is around a 6-week time frame. It's plus or minus, always depends how complex is your company. If I have a 15-person company, is obviously different as if I have a 150,000-person company. So you have to keep the company size in mind. You also have to keep the complexity of the products in mind. Even a small company may have very complex products, right? While there is no set time, I think this is something you want to keep as a rough guideline, the 6 weeks, maybe plus minus, adjusted to your requirements. And one last time, I know I mention it again because I see companies of all sizes failing because they missed the business analysis step and they did not do a thorough investigation with the tool ahead of time. So I know it's an upfront investment. It is something that will pay off if you do it. So I would not save and try to save some money in this area. It's worth the investment and it will pay off as you go forward. This gets us to the end of this webinar. And if you have any follow-up questions, if you want us to provide some more information on some of these points, or if you're a provider and want to participate in the CPQ Provider Series, go ahead, send us an email at info@novocpq.com. We usually reply very fast, but definitely within 24 hours, so do not hesitate to send us an email. We're happy to provide more info on this topic as needed. I want to thank you very much for your attention and hope this is helpful for you, and I want to thank you.